This is a ranking of every major Italian fighter of the Second World War, from the machines that failed their pilots to the ones that finally matched the best in the sky. We start at the worst Italian fighter aircraft. Number 20, IMAM RO-44. The IMAM RO-44 was a floatplane fighter built to defend Italian naval bases and escort convoys along the coastline. On paper, that sounds like a reasonable niche. In practice, it was a fighter compromised from the very first sketch. Strapping two large pontoon floats under a fighter airframe adds enormous drag, and the RO-44 paid for it in every performance category that mattered. Climb rate, top speed, and maneuverability all suffered badly compared to land-based fighters of the same era. Its fixed undercarriage, in float form, gave it none of the flexibility a real interceptor needed. Pilots flying it against modern monoplanes stood almost no chance in a straight fight. It saw limited combat use, mostly relegated to reconnaissance and local patrol duties rather than serious air defense. The RO-44 wasn't a failure of ambition, it was a failure of concept. Naval fighter doctrines simply couldn't keep pace with land-based fighter evolution, and this aircraft is the clearest proof of that gap. It opens our list because it was never meant to fight the war Italy actually found itself in. Number 19, Fiat CR-32. The Fiat CR-32 was a legend of the Spanish Civil War, fast, nimble, and beloved by the pilots who flew it in the 1930s. But that's exactly the problem. By the time Italy entered the Second World War in June 1940, the CR-32 was already a decade-old design fighting a war that had moved past biplanes entirely. Its fixed landing gear and open cockpit were charming in 1936 and suicidal in 1940. Against modern monoplane fighters like the Hurricane or the Bf-109, the CR-32 simply couldn't compete on speed or firepower, no matter how tight its turning circle was. Pilots who had learned to trust it in Spain now found themselves outpaced before they even closed to gun range. Italy kept a number of CR-32s in secondary and training roles through the early war years, which tells you everything about where the Regia Aeronautica actually rated it for frontline combat. It's included here not because it was a bad aircraft in its own era, but because that era had already ended. This is where things started going wrong. Obsolescence, not incompetence. Number 18, Caproni Vizzola F-5. The Caproni Vizzola F-5 was a private venture, a monoplane fighter designed to compete for a contract that ultimately went elsewhere. It never reached mass production, and the reasons why are instructive. The F-5 suffered from mediocre performance figures that simply didn't stand out against the competing designs already being adopted by the Regia Aeronautica. Its handling was unremarkable, its power plant unimpressive, and its overall package offered no compelling reason for the Italian Air Force to disrupt existing production lines to build it. A small number of prototypes and pre-production aircraft were built and evaluated, but the program never gained the momentum needed to matter operationally. Unlike some experimental designs on this list, the F-5 wasn't held back by bad luck or unfortunate timing. It was simply outclassed by contemporaries that did the same job better. This is a common story in wartime aviation, a competent but unremarkable design, competing against better resourced and better engineered rivals, quietly fading into obscurity. But the next entries on this list suffered from even deeper problems than simply being unremarkable. Number 17, Ambrosini SAI-207. The Ambrosini SAI-207 was one of the most promising what-if stories in Italian aviation, a lightweight fighter built largely from wood, designed around a small but efficient engine, and praised by test pilots for its excellent handling and impressive agility. On paper, this sounds like a strong contender. The problem was scale. Italy's wartime industrial base couldn't reliably produce the engines and materials needed to turn a handful of promising prototypes into a real frontline fighter force. Production orders were placed, then scaled back, then effectively abandoned as the war situation deteriorated and priorities shifted elsewhere. Pilots who did fly early examples spoke well of its responsiveness, but responsiveness doesn't win battles if there are only a few airframes available. The SAI-207 represents a recurring tragedy across this list, genuine engineering promise strangled by Italy's inability to mass-produce modern aircraft fast enough. It's ranked low not because the design failed, but because the industrial system around it failed to deliver it in any meaningful numbers before the war moved on without it. Number 16, IMAM RO-57. The IMAM RO-57 was Italy's attempt at a twin-engine heavy fighter, intended to combine long-range, heavier firepower, and multi-role flexibility in a single airframe, a concept the Luftwaffe was pursuing with more success at the same time. The RO-57 fell short on almost every count. Its performance was sluggish compared to single-engine fighters, its handling was heavy and unresponsive in dogfight, and its power plants struggled to deliver enough combined thrust to make the concept work. Pilots transitioning from single-engine fighters found it cumbersome, lacking the immediate responsiveness needed for aerial combat against more agile opposition. A fighter-bomber variant was also attempted, spreading an already underperforming airframe across multiple roles instead of excelling at one. Limited numbers were built, and it saw only modest operational use before being effectively sidelined. The RO-57 illustrates a broader truth about heavy twin-engine fighters in this era. The concept only worked when paired with powerful, reliable engines, and Italy simply didn't have them. This is where the ranking becomes brutal, because from here forward, every entry represents a genuine operational liability. Number 15. Breda BA-65. The Breda BA-65 was designed primarily as a ground attack and reconnaissance aircraft, but it was pressed into fighter and escort roles it was never built for, and that mismatch defines its place on this list. It was a rugged airframe with a reasonably powerful engine for its class, but it lacked the agility, climb rate, and defensive firepower needed to survive against dedicated enemy fighters. In North Africa, where it saw its heaviest use, BA-65 crews faced brutal attrition when intercepted by more capable Allied aircraft. Its size and weight, useful for carrying bombs and rockets, became a serious liability the moment it had to maneuver against a fighter on its tail. Ground crews found it relatively easy to maintain, and pilots appreciated its sturdiness in the attack role, but sturdiness doesn't help you dogfight. Its use as an improvised fighter reflects less on the aircraft itself and more on Italy's shortage of dedicated aircraft for every role. Judged purely as a combat aircraft asked to fight fighters, the BA-65 simply wasn't built for the job, and it paid for that mismatch in losses. Number 14. Fiat CR-42 Falco. The Fiat CR-42 Falco was, by any honest measure, one of the finest biplane fighters ever built, and that's precisely why it ranks where it does. Italy entered the war in 1940 still relying heavily on this design, even as most other major air forces had already committed to monoplanes. The CR-42 was beautifully maneuverable, with a tight turning radius that made it deadly in a classic dogfight against another biplane. But against Hurricanes and Spitfires, that turning radius meant nothing if the enemy simply used superior speed to avoid a turning fight altogether. Pilots loved its handling and its forgiving nature, but many paid with their lives for flying a fixed-gear, open-cockpit fighter into an era of fast monoplane interceptors. It fought bravely over Britain, North Africa, and the Mediterranean, often outclassed but rarely outflown by its skilled pilots. The tragedy of the CR-42 isn't poor engineering, it's poor timing. Unlike the vehicles below it on this list, this was a genuinely excellent aircraft asked to fight a war it had already been made obsolete for. Number 13. Reggiane Re.2005 Falco. The Reggiane Re.2005 Falco was an aerodynamically excellent airframe let down by circumstances almost entirely outside the designer's control. Inspired by American Seversky fighter designs, it offered strong maneuverability and a robust airframe capable of absorbing battle damage. The problem was Italy's chronic engine shortage. The RE-2000 was designed around a radial engine that competed for production capacity with other priority aircraft, and the Regia Aeronautica largely passed it over in favor of designs using different power plants already in the supply chain. Its landing gear, retracting into unusually thin wings, was also criticized by pilots and maintenance crews as fragile and prone to damage during hard landings. Ironically, the RE-2000 found more success abroad. Export versions flown by Hungary and Sweden performed admirably and were well regarded by their pilots. At home, though, it remained a marginal type, built in relatively small numbers and rarely trusted with frontline interception duties. It's a case study in a truly capable airframe undone by industrial politics and structural weak points rather than any fundamental flaw in its flying qualities. Number 12. Fiat G.55 Freccia. The Fiat G.55 Freccia holds a genuinely important place in history as Italy's first operational monoplane fighter with retractable landing gear, a real technological leap for the Regia Aeronautica. But being first doesn't mean being good, and the G.50 struggled with a chronically underpowered engine that left it slower and less capable in climb than its contemporaries like the Bf 109 or even the British Hurricane. Early production models had an enclosed cockpit that Italian pilots, accustomed to open-air visibility and a strong sense of situational awareness, actively disliked and campaigned to have replaced with an open canopy. That complaint alone tells you how far behind the curve Italian fighter doctrine still was in the late 1930s. Its armament, just 2 machine guns, was also considered light even by the standards of the day. The G-50 fought over France, Britain, Greece, and North Africa, always adequate, but rarely dominant. It matters historically as a stepping stone toward better designs that followed it, but as a combat fighter judged on its own merits, it was consistently outperformed by better-engined rivals throughout its service life. Number 11. Piaggio P119. The Piaggio P119 was one of the most unusual fighter designs to come out of wartime Italy, a single-engine fighter with the engine mounted behind the cockpit, driving the propeller through an extension shaft. The idea was to improve forward visibility and concentrate armament in the nose, free from the need to synchronize guns through a spinning propeller. It was a genuinely clever piece of engineering thinking, and only one prototype was ever completed. But the configuration introduced serious cooling problems for the mid-mounted engine, along with structural and maintenance headaches that a wartime industrial base already stretched thin simply couldn't afford to solve. Development dragged on without ever reaching a stage where the type could be seriously considered for mass production, and the project was ultimately abandoned as resources were redirected elsewhere. The P119 stands as one of Italy's more fascinating dead ends, proof that clever engineering alone couldn't overcome the practical realities of wartime production capacity. And with that, we close out the worst of Italy's wartime fighters. Now, moving the best Italian fighter aircraft. Number 10. Fiat G.55 bis. The Fiat G.55 bis was Italy's answer to the complaints pilots had lodged against the original G50, and it's a good example of incremental improvement actually working. The bis variant reinstated a semi-open cockpit configuration that pilots preferred, improved armor protection for the pilot, and made small refinements to handling and structural strength based on frontline feedback. It wasn't a dramatic leap forward in raw performance, since it retained the same underpowered engine that had limited the original design, but it was a meaningfully more combat-worthy aircraft than its predecessor. Pilots reported greater confidence in the bis model, appreciating both the improved visibility compromise and the added protection in a fight. It continued to serve on multiple fronts, including North Africa and the Eastern Front, providing reliable if unspectacular service throughout the middle years of the war. The G50 bis earns its place at the bottom of the best category because it represents Italy actually listening to its pilots and improving a design based on real combat experience, a pattern that would define the far more successful fighters still to come. Number 9. Fiat CR42CN. The Fiat CR42CN takes the same biplane airframe we ranked near the bottom of this list and proves that context changes everything. Fitted with airborne radar and operating specifically as a night fighter, the CR42CN found a genuine niche where its low speed and superb low-altitude maneuverability actually became advantages rather than liabilities. Against slow-moving night bombers, raw top speed mattered far less than stability, endurance, and the ability to make tight, controlled intercepts in darkness. Pilots flying the night fighter variant appreciated its forgiving handling characteristics during the demanding conditions of nighttime interception, when a twitchy or unstable aircraft could easily disorient its crew. It scored real successes against Allied night bombing raids over Italy, proving that even an obsolete daytime fighter could be repurposed intelligently rather than simply retired. This entry matters because it shows Italian engineers and airmen adapting a flawed asset into a specialized tool rather than abandoning it outright. It's a small but genuine success story, and it's why the same airframe appears twice on this list with two very different verdicts. Number 8. IMAM RO-58. The IMAM RO-58 was a late-war twin-engine heavy fighter project, developed as Italy searched for a more capable answer to Allied heavy bombers and long-range escorts than earlier twin-engine attempts like the RO-57 had provided. Where the RO-57 struggled with sluggish performance, the RO-58 was a more refined and aerodynamically cleaner design, intended to carry heavier forward-firing armament, suited to bomber interception, while maintaining better overall handling than its predecessor. Development, however, ran directly into the collapsing wartime timeline. By the time serious prototype testing was underway, Italy's industrial capacity, fuel supplies, and strategic situation were deteriorating rapidly following the armistice. The type never reached operational squadrons in meaningful numbers, its promise essentially frozen in the prototype stage. It's included in the best category not because it changed the war, but because its engineering represented genuine, informed progress over earlier twin-engine failures, proof that Italian designers were still learning and improving even as the war effort around them was falling apart. It's a story of what might have been rather than what was. Number 7. Macchi MC-200 Setta. The Macchi MC-200 Setta was Italy's first truly modern monoplane fighter to strike the right balance between speed, maneuverability, and structural strength. Its stubby, radial engine fuselage gave it exceptional agility, and pilots consistently praised its forgiving, predictable handling in a dogfight. It could outturn most opponents it faced in the early war years. Its main weakness was firepower, carrying only 2 machine guns for much of its service life, which limited its ability to bring down more heavily armored or structurally tough enemy aircraft quickly. Compared to the Bf-109 or Spitfire, it was slower in a straight line, but in a turning fight, few contemporaries could match it. It fought extensively over the Mediterranean, North Africa, and the Eastern Front, earning a reputation as a solid, dependable workhorse rather than a spectacular performer. Ground crews found it relatively straightforward to maintain, and its sturdy construction let it absorb damage that would have brought down more fragile designs. The Setta matters historically as the aircraft that proved Italian engineers could build a genuinely competitive modern fighter, setting the stage for everything that followed. Number 6. Reggiane Re.2001 Falco II. The Reggiane Re.2001 Falco II took the aerodynamically excellent airframe of the earlier Re.2000 and finally paired it with a licensed inline engine that gave it real competitive performance. The switch from radial to inline power improved both speed and streamlining, and the Re.2001 handled with the same confident agility that had always been the Reggiane design team's strength. Pilots found it faster and more capable in the climb than the original Falco, while retaining excellent maneuverability that let it hold its own against contemporary Allied fighters over Malta and the Mediterranean. A specialized night fighter variant and even an armored ground attack version demonstrated the airframe's underlying flexibility. Its main limitation remained production scale. Italy simply couldn't build inline engines fast enough to equip the Re.2001 in numbers its performance deserved, so it always remained a secondary type numerically compared to the Macchi fighters. Even so, pilots who flew it generally regarded it as a genuine step forward, an aircraft that finally lived up to the promise the Re.2000's airframe had always hinted at. Number 5. Reggiane Re.2002 R8. The Reggiane Re.2002 R8 shifted the same excellent Reggiane airframe lineage toward a dedicated fighter-bomber role, and in that specific niche, it excelled. Powered by a reliable radial engine, the R8 traded some of the pure interceptor performance of its siblings for ruggedness, load-carrying capacity, and the ability to absorb ground fire while delivering bombs accurately at low altitude. Pilots flying ground attack missions valued its stable low-speed handling and its capacity to survive damage that would have crippled a more delicate airframe, qualities that matter enormously when you're operating at treetop height under enemy fire. It saw service both with Italian forces and later, after the armistice, with German units operating captured examples, a rare compliment for an Italian design during that chaotic period. Compared to dedicated fighters, it wasn't meant to dogfight enemy interceptors, and it generally avoided doing so. But judged against its actual mission, surviving and delivering ordnance under fire, the R8 was a genuine success, proof that the same design lineage that struggled to find its footing as a pure fighter could thrive when matched to the right role. Number 4. Macchi C.202 Folgore. The Macchi C.202 Folgore was the aircraft that finally proved Italian airframe design, paired with a proper high-performance engine, could compete directly with the best fighters in the world. By marrying the excellent aerodynamic lines of the earlier MC-200 with a license-built Daimler-Benz inline engine, Macchi produced a fighter that was fast, exceptionally agile, and genuinely respected by both its own pilots and the Allied airmen who faced it. It could outturn a Bf-109 and hold its own in speed against contemporary Spitfires, and pilots consistently described it as a joy to fly. Light on the controls, forgiving, and confidence-inspiring in a way few Italian fighters before it had been. Its main weakness remained armament, still relatively light by 1942 standards, and its production was constantly bottlenecked by the same engine shortages that had plagued Italian aviation throughout the war. Even so, the Folgore fought with real distinction over Malta, North Africa, and the Mediterranean, and it's widely considered the aircraft that restored genuine pilot confidence in Italian fighter design after years of underpowered disappointments. This is where the ranking finally reaches machines crews trusted without reservation. Number 3. Reggiane Re.2005 Sagittario. The Reggiane Re.2005 Sagittario was, by pure performance figures, arguably the best all-around fighter Italy ever built. Fast, exceptionally well-armed with cannon armament, and blessed with the refined aerodynamics that had always been the Reggiane Design Bureau's signature strength. Powered by the same license-built Daimler-Benz engine used in the other elite Series 5 fighters, the Sagittario combined excellent high-altitude performance with genuinely impressive maneuverability, and test pilots who flew it against captured Allied fighters came away consistently impressed. Its tragedy is scale rather than substance. Fewer than 50 were ever completed before Italy's surrender, and the chaos that followed effectively ended serial production. Pilots who did fly it in combat, defending Rome against Allied bombing raids, praised its speed and firepower without reservation. It ranks below the two aircraft above it not because it was technically inferior, but because its impact on the actual course of the air war was necessarily limited by how few ever reached frontline squadrons. It stands as proof of just how far Italian fighter design had progressed by the final years of the war. Brilliant, but tragically too late and too few. Number 2. Macchi C.205 Folgore. The Macchi C.205 Folgore represents the natural evolution of the Folgore into something genuinely elite, the same trusted airframe, now paired with more powerful engine and heavier cannon armament that finally matched its exceptional handling. Pilots who transitioned from the MC.202 found the Folgore faster, harder hitting, and just as forgiving and confidence-inspiring in the cockpit, a rare combination in any wartime fighter. It performed superbly against the best Allied fighters encountered, including the P-51 Mustang and Spitfire, holding its own in engagements where earlier Italian fighters would have simply been outclassed. German pilots who flew captured or Italian Social Republic-operated examples after the armistice spoke highly of its balance and responsiveness, a significant compliment considering the quality of German fighters at that stage of the war. Its limitations were, once again, production scale rather than design. Italy's collapsing industrial base in 1943 could never build enough Veltros to matter strategically. Still, in the hands of a skilled pilot, the MC.205 could genuinely compete with anything in the sky, and it remains one of the most respected Italian fighters ever built. Number 1. Fiat G.55 Centauro. The Fiat G.55 Centauro earns the top position on this list because it wasn't just an excellent fighter, it was an Italian fighter that other air forces actively wanted for themselves. Built around the same powerful inline engine as its Series 5 siblings, the Centauro combined strong high-altitude performance, heavy cannon and machine gun armament, and a sturdy, well-balanced airframe that pilots trusted implicitly in combat. What sets it apart is the endorsement it received from German test pilots, who, after evaluating all three of Italy's late-war elite fighters, rated the G.55 as the best of the group and recommended it for wider production, even suggesting it as a potential replacement type for the Luftwaffe's own fighter force. That's an extraordinary vote of confidence for an Italian design after years of underpowered, outclassed aircraft earlier in this list. It combined the handling and firepower of the Veltro with even better high-altitude stability, giving pilots a genuinely versatile fighter capable of both bomber interception and dogfighting on equal terms with the best Allied aircraft. Like its siblings, it arrived too late and in too few numbers to change the war's outcome. But as a piece of engineering, the Fiat G.55 Centauro stands as the single finest fighter Italy produced during the Second World War, the aircraft that proved Italian design had finally caught up with, and in some respects surpassed, the best in the world. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button for more World War II aviation history. Thanks for watching this video. See you in the next ranking.